Imagine a wild animal, attracted by an unseen thread of loyalty, attending the ultimate farewell of his human rescuer. Here is an example of a wolf attending the funeral of his rescuer. In the foothills of the Italian Alps, there was a small cemetery that was covered in snow, and the wind brought the solemn hymns across the snow-covered ground. Isabella Rossi was a woman who was recognized across the valley for her infinite compassion and her strong connection to the natural world. Mourners stood with their heads down, their breaths misting in the cold air as they paid their last respects to Isabella Rossi. They were bundled in black coats. A vacuum was left in the hearts of the villagers, and, unbeknownst to the majority of them, in the heart of a wild creature when Isabella, who had spent a peaceful life tending to her tiny farm, passed away peacefully in her sleep. Isabella had led a calm life. Isabella had discovered him many years ago, during a particularly difficult winter. He was a young wolf who had been trapped in a hunter's snare, with his leg significantly damaged and his spirit completely destroyed. Isabella had been advised by the local villagers to abandon him to his fate, since they were afraid of wolves. The refusal came from Isabella, whose heart was filled to the brim with compassion for any creature that was suffering. She had traveled through the deep snow on a daily basis, bringing him food and tending to his wounds with compassionate hands and calming words. She had done this for a number of days. It had been several weeks, but she had nursed him back to health over the course of a very tedious process. Isabella had released the wolf, whom she had called Angelo, which means angel in Italian, when he was finally well enough to return to the wild. She had done so with a mixture of regret and hope. Having gained an awareness of the wild character of the creature that she had rescued, she never anticipated her encounter with him again. However, over the years that followed, Angelo continued to be a solitary figure who existed on the outskirts of Isabella's existence. His watchful eyes would frequently emerge at the edge of her fields, studying her as she tended to her crops or cared for her animals. He would frequently find himself there. Despite the fact that he never approached closely or actively sought engagement, his presence was a gentle acknowledgement of the link that they had and a tacit vow of allegiance. The villagers had occasionally caught a sight of the enormous grey wolf in the distance, and rumors of Isabella's wild guardian had become a local legend. This was a tribute to Isabella's exceptional connection with the natural world. They spoke of him with a mixture of amazement and a lingering discomfort, and no one ever really understood the depth of the silent understanding that existed between the woman and the wolf throughout their conversation. At this moment, the mourners fell silent as the casket containing Isabella was lowered into the ground around her. The final blessings imparted by the priest reverberated over the tranquil cemetery. This was followed by a collective gasp that reverberated across the stadium. As it emerged from the tree line that surrounded the cemetery, a massive grey wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, his gaze riveted on the ground that had just been turned over. Angelo was the one. With his muscular frame, he moved slowly and methodically, providing a striking contrast to the melancholy quiet that prevailed among the human assemblage. Not only did he not approach the mourners, but he also did not growl or display any other aggressive behavior. The only thing he did was stand there, a silent sentinel, with his head slightly bowed and his eyes, which were the color of warm honey, fixed on the location where Isabella would be laid to rest. A wolf is seen attending the funeral of his rescuer. It was a scene that was both stunning and profoundly unnerving. A wild creature was paying homage to the human who had showed him kindness. Because of this incredible display of allegiance, the people watched in stunned silence, their anxiety momentarily forgotten in the face of this extraordinary display. For what reason had he come here? It was unclear to him what he understood about this human ritual of separation. Next, what would he do with his life? A sense that something genuinely extraordinary was about to unravel. A final, shocking chapter in the story of Isabella and her wild angel was present in the air, and it crackled with questions that were not being directly addressed. Angelo's presence at Isabella's funeral caused a wave of surprised quiet to spread throughout the tiny gathering of relatives and friends who were grieving her loss. Their features, which had been carved with sorrow for their comrade who had passed away just moments earlier, now exhibited a mixture of surprise, awe, and a lingering primeval terror. The children, who were clinging to their parents, hands, pointed with eyes that were wide and curious. The older villagers, whose faces had become weathered from years of living in close proximity to the wild, exchanged apprehensive glances with one another, their long-standing fear of wolves coming back to the surface. Father Marco, who had just finished pronouncing the final blessing, stood motionless by the graveside, his prayer book still open in his hands. He had just ended his service. He was familiar with the stories that were told about Isabella's wolf in the area, but witnessing the gorgeous beast with his own eyes, in the midst of this somber human ritual, was an experience that went beyond the realm of mythology. In that moment, he was overcome with a profound sense of the sacred, a sensation of the interdependence of life and death. Angelo lingered at the edge of the cemetery for a number of extended periods of time, a solitary figure of grey against the backdrop of snow-covered tombstones and black cypress trees. He remained motionless and silent, his concentrated stare set on the tomb that had just been covered with a fresh layer of dirt. It was as if he had a comprehension of the significance of the event, as well as the irreversibility of Isabella's disappearance. After that, Angelo started to move in a careful and unhurried manner. He respected the mourning by keeping a respectful distance from them and did not approach them. His muscular paws left silent impressions in the soft snow as he strolled along the perimeter of the cemetery instead of wandering around the cemetery itself. It appeared as though he was acknowledging each individual who had come to say farewell to his rescuer, as he made one complete circuit of the burial mound, his gaze sweeping over the sad faces and bowed heads of those who had come to pay their respects. There was a tangible tension in the atmosphere. Despite the fact that they were enthralled by the wolf's presence, the villagers were unable to completely overcome their natural apprehension of the presence of a wild predator among them. In the midst of the crowd, whispers came and went. Was he a likely threat? To what end did he seek? Suddenly, would he turn his back on them? His demeanor, on the other hand, was anything but menacing. His motions were slow and almost reverent, and his eyes, which were filled with sorrow, conveyed a level of passion that was beyond the scope of language. A young girl named Sophia, who was Isabella's granddaughter and who had frequently listened to her grandmother's stories about the wolf that she had rescued with wide-eyed wonder, managed to escape her mother's hands. Taking a hesitant stride in the direction of Angelo, she approached him with her small hand extended. Fear was written all over her mother's face, as she immediately drew her back when she let out a gasp. On the other hand, Nonna Emilia, Isabella's elderly neighbor, tried to reassure Sophia's mother by placing a reassuring hand on her arm. At the same time that her eyes were filled with a knowing anguish, she said, "Let her be. There is no danger to her." It is a memory of his kindness. Angelo halted in the middle of his leisurely circle, and his gaze became directed toward the youngster. There was a brief moment when their eyes met, and it was a moment filled with the profound anguish of a wild beast and the innocent curiosity of a kid. After then, Angelo began his silent walk, completing his circuit around the location where Isabella was laid to rest. At long last, he came to a halt once more at the base of the grave, precisely in front of the heap of freshly churned ground. In what appeared to be a final act of tribute, he bowed his enormous head and gently rested it on the snow-covered ground. A collective sigh was let out by the locals as they gathered together. An overwhelming feeling of the remarkable had begun to take its place, and the terror had started to fade away. The wild heart that was paying its respects was something that they were watching, and it was genuinely remarkable. The priest, Father Marco, took a step closer, his voice quivering with the anguish he was experiencing. He said, "Even in the wild, there is loyalty," while keeping his stare fixated on Angelo to convey his message. Isabella's generosity had an effect on all that was alive. At that moment, the sun began to sink beyond the summits of the mountains, resulting in the cemetery being covered in darkness. In spite of the fact that their sadness was still raw, the mourners began to awaken and say their goodbyes. Their pain was now mixed with a sense of amazement. They approached the silent wolf with a cautious and leisurely movement, their initial panic having been replaced by a quiet respect for the animal. Despite the fact that his head was still bowed, Angelo remained at the base of the grave. And when the last of the mourners started to leave the cemetery, throwing their final, lingering glances at the wolf that was grieving, The question that hung heavy in the air remained, what would he do next? Did he intend to go back to the wild after his tribute was paid? Alternatively, would his devotion to Isabella be demonstrated in a manner that was even more unbelievable? It was a frightening demonstration of the depth of a link that transcended the limits of species and death itself, that the answer was waiting for them in the waning light. When Isabella's funeral was held the day following, the small community was filled with whispered conversations about the wolf that was found in the cemetery. There was a blurring of the lines between the familiar world of human mourning and the enigmatic domain of animal loyalty as a result of the astounding sight, which had left an indelible impact on everyone who had observed it. On the other hand, perceptions remained divided. Some people, notably the more senior citizens of the hamlet who recalled stories of wolves hunting sheep, encouraged caution since they interpreted Angelo's appearance as a portent of impending danger. Others were moved by his apparent anguish and the undeniable respect he had showed, and they regarded him as a sign of a link that went beyond the natural order. They saw him as a witness to Isabella's loving heart. Some of the more scared residents were the ones who initially contacted the local authorities, and they immediately arrived to assess the situation. With extreme caution, they approached the cemetery, anticipating that they might come upon a wild animal that posed a hazard. On the other hand, when they saw Angelo resting calmly at the foot of Isabella's tomb, his posture was serene, and his gaze was fixated on the ground. They were hesitant. Angelo's calm demeanor and the apparent sense of loss flowing from him were emphasized by Father Marco and Old Man Tiberiu when they described the events that took place during the burial. Despite the fact that they were still concerned about the safety of the general public, the authorities decided against immediately apprehending Angelo and instead agreed to keep an eye on him for a bit. The people in the village were cautioned to maintain their distance and to report any signs of aggressiveness that they observed. Angelo, however, continued to be a calm mourner throughout the days that passed, and his routine remained unchanged. Every morning before daybreak, he would make his way to the cemetery, where he would lie down by Isabella's grave until sunset. Occasionally, he would let forth melancholy howls that reverberated across the peaceful valley. It is not true that he went about the village looking for food, nor did he approach any of the people who lived there. It seems that his main concentration was on locating the ultimate resting place of his rescuer. Young Sophia, who was encouraged by Nonna Emilia's assurances and her own childlike enthusiasm, would frequently plant miniature wildflowers at the foot of Isabella's tomb. These flowers were a silent offering to both the deceased woman and her companion who was grieving. Angelo would observe her with a mild sense of curiosity, but he would never make any attempt to approach her or threaten her in any way. The hearts of some of the more suspicious people were further warmed as a result of this private engagement, with their scientific interest now being tempered by a developing respect for the one-of-a-kind circumstance. Dr. Alistair Finch and his research team, who had initially intended to capture Angelo, remained in the community as well. Angelo was observed from a distance, and his behavior and vocalizations were scrupulously documented by whomever was observing him. During private chats with Dr. Volkov, who had remained on to provide assistance, Dr. Finch stated that he had never seen anything quite like it before. The activities of the wolf defied the standard understanding of animal behavior, implying a level of emotional depth and commitment that was both disconcerting and fascinating from a scientific standpoint. By the time the days grew into weeks, Angelo's presence in the cemetery had become a common sight, and it had become an accepted component of the landscape of the community. The initial dread had, for the most part, dissipated, and it had been replaced with a quiet knowledge that this wild creature was connected to Isabella by a bond that was beyond the grasp of humans. Despite this, the question of what he would do next continued to be a persistent one. Would it be possible for a wild wolf to still be so dedicated to the memory of a human? Is it possible that the allure of the wild might eventually bring him back to his own population? Alternatively, was there something even more spectacular in store for him? A final, unfathomable act of loyalty that would forever etch his story into the very center of the valley. As the villagers watched and waited, their initial shock gradually gave way to a profound sense of awe at the enduring power of a link that had been established in the moment of a desperate rescue. Angelo's unflinching vigil at Isabella's grave continued as the weeks passed, serving as a moving monument to a connection that defied the natural order of things. The villagers had become accustomed to his presence, and their initial terror had been replaced by a quiet reverence and a sense of shared suffering. Even after speaking with Dr. Volkov and watching Angelo's continuously placid behavior, the authorities came to the conclusion that they should not intervene and instead allow him to remain in the area so long as he did not pose any threat. As a result of Angelo's peculiar behavior, Dr. Finch and his study team kept their distance from him. Their scientific interest was stirred. They were trying to capture and analyze his melodious cries, searching for patterns or structures that would offer insights into animal communication and mourning. They had deployed advanced recording equipment in order to accomplish this. As the light began to paint the snow-capped peaks with a golden hue, Dr. Finch's team made a stunning finding while evaluating the audio recordings. This discovery occurred on a morning when the temperature was freezing. They heard faint, high-pitched sounds that were outside the normal vocal range of a wolf. These sounds were mixed in with Angelo's melancholy cries. These sounds had a particular rhythm that kept repeating, and they were almost musical in nature. Because he was curious, Dr. Finch improved the audio by removing the wind and other noises that were present in the environment. He felt a chill of astonishment run down his spine as he listened to what emerged from the static. Angelo's howls appeared to be intertwined with a series of whistles that were extremely weak yet audible. These whistles were not random. Rather, they were a series of whistles. The pattern of these whistles was disturbingly similar, and it was hauntingly familiar. At the same time as his mind was racing, Dr. Finch frantically scanned his notes. It was old man Tiberiu who told him about Isabella's late husband, a shepherd who had a distinctive method of calling his sheep and interacting with the surrounding fauna using a succession of whistles that were all different from one another. He recalled this story. It was also suggested by Tiberiu that Isabella had learned some of these whistles on her own. Could it be that... Was Angelo reacting not only to Isabella's recollection, but also to a certain mode of communication that she had discussed with him? The notion was mind-boggling, implying a level of interspecies knowledge that was significantly higher than anything they had ever conceived of. Dr. Finch quickly informed Dr. Volkov of his results, and Dr. Volkov listened to the upgraded recordings with a wide range of feelings, including great astonishment and intense excitement. The compassionate manner in which Isabella had talked of Angelo, as well as the silent hours that she had spent caring to his wounds, were engraved in his memory. During that period of time, would it have been possible for her to develop a one-of-a-kind method of communication with him by making use of the whistles that she had learnt from her husband? A new wave of wonder spread over the town as a result of the revelation. The presence of the wolf at Isabella's grave was no longer merely an expression of mourning. Rather, it was a continuation of a wordless communication, a response to a language of whistles that only he and Isabella had been able to comprehend. His side of the communication consisted of the musical howls, which stood as a wild echo in response to a human call that had been rendered permanently quiet. But the twist became even more complicated. While Dr. Finch's team was analyzing the patterns of Angelo's screams and the whistles that corresponded to them, they came upon something that was even more remarkable. Angelo's howls appeared to have a structure that was similar to the melodic patterns of the whistles, almost as if he was attempting to duplicate the sounds himself. It is possible that Angelo, a species that lives in the wild, could have acquired the ability to comprehend and even imitate a human mode of communication. The repercussions were really spectacular. The findings revealed that wolves possessed a degree of cognitive ability and emotional connectedness that scientists had only just begun to investigate for themselves. Angelo was not merely grieving, rather, he was communicating, maintaining a quiet vigil by employing a vocabulary of love and loss that transcended the bounds of species. The question of what he would do next took on a whole different perspective as a result of this. What was he doing? Only sitting there and listening for a call that would never come? Or was there a more profound reason for his presence, a last-minute, unfathomable act of allegiance that was driven by this remarkable mode of communication? The discovery of the faint whistles that were embedded inside Angelo's howls caused a ripple of shock and a profound sense of awe to spread throughout the small community as well as the study team. When the upgraded audio recordings were handed to Old Man Tiberio, he listened to them with tears flowing down his worn cheeks. The echoes of Isabella's late husband were undeniably the faint, melodious whistles, a sound that he had not heard clearly in decades. He had not heard the whistles in a long time. He was profoundly affected by the realization that Angelo was not merely grieving, but was actively responding to a language of love that had been forgotten across time. It was as if a previously concealed aspect of Isabella's existence, a covert link to the natural world, had been brought to daylight. The explanation left the villagers feeling profoundly affected, despite the fact that they had previously been perplexed by the scientific conclusions. Given the circumstances, the continuous presence of the wolf at Isabella's grave took on an even more significant meaning. It was not merely an expression of a primitive loyalty, rather, it was a continuation of a discourse, a wild heart repeating a human tune that was now only present in memory. In its place, a genuine respect and a sense of wonder for the incredible link that Isabella had created emerged, and the initial anxiety and worry that some individuals had been harboring entirely vanished. Angelo was no longer merely a wolf. Rather, he was a human embodiment of a love that was not limited to a single species and even survived death. Particularly enthralled by the revelation was the young girl, Sophia, who had always had an innate sense of connection to Angelo. Quite frequently, she would be found sitting in silence close to the boundary of the cemetery, humming soft tunes and pondering whether Angelo might in some way hear her. She was overwhelmed with a sense of awe and a greater connection to the wild creature, as she considered the possibility that the wolf might be able to grasp a different sort of human communication. It was clear that Dr. Alistair Finch and his research team were shocked by the results of their investigation. Their previously held beliefs about the cognitive and emotional capabilities of animals were called into question by the facts. A level of auditory processing and associative learning in wolves that was significantly more complex than what was previously recognized was revealed by the faint whistles that were so clearly intermingled with Angelo's howls. After shedding his initial clinical detachment, Dr. Finch approached Angelo with a newfound devotion and observed him with a gaze that was almost reverent. He gave his team the instruction to proceed with the utmost caution and respect, highlighting the fact that their major objective should now be to comprehend and record this unique phenomena without giving the wolf any kind of suffering. The tremendous sense of validation that Dr. Volkov had was a result of the fact that he has always maintained a more holistic view of animal behavior. He had a perception of the extent of Angelo's bond to Isabella, and the finding of the whistles offered a concrete reason for the wolf's unflinching dedication to Isabella during their whole relationship. Through close collaboration with Dr. Finch's team, he made certain that their research procedures were both ethical and minimally invasive throughout the entire process. The emphasis of the investigation underwent a significant redirection. Instead of focusing on capturing Angelo for the purpose of research, the team is now concentrating on recording and studying his vocalizations. Additionally, they are seeking to comprehend the circumstances in which Isabella may have utilized the whistles. Old Man Tiberio was the subject of intensive interviews, during which they attempted to reconstruct the particular patterns and melodies of Isabella's husband's whistle recordings. The modest cottage that Isabella lived in was also searched by the investigators in the hopes of discovering any written notes or recordings that could provide additional insight into her interactions with Angelo. Because of the finding of the whistles, Angelo went from being a sorrowful animal to becoming a focus of enormous attention among both the scientific community and the general public. Due to the rapid dissemination of information on the musical wolf, the small community became a destination for wildlife enthusiasts and journalists. On the other hand, the locals, who were extremely protective of Angelo and Isabella's legacy, came together to establish a unified front. This group protected him from unwanted attention and made certain that his tranquility was not disrupted. They were aware that they were observing something holy, a final, unfathomable gesture of love that was spoken in a language that went beyond the limits of the human world and the natural world. With the enigma of this concealed communication and the enduring force of a link that was built in compassion and articulated in a haunting, musical farewell. The question of what Angelo would do next now bore an even greater weight than it had before. As people in the hamlet and the rest of the globe marveled at the incredible connection that existed between Isabella and Angelo, as well as the eerie songs that reverberated throughout the cemetery, a new facet of concern started to emerge. The local hunting society, which is well known for its traditional perspectives on wildlife management and its perceived encroachment on human territory, began to express their uneasiness with Angelo's continuing stay in the area. Despite the fact that the narrative of the weeping wolf was heartwarming, their leader, a guy named Vittorio, who was severe and influential, claimed that it was ultimately a hazardous romanticism that ignored the obvious risks that come with having a wild predator so close to human settlement. According to him, there have been instances in the past where wolves have attacked animals, and even, in extremely rare instances, posed a threat to people. Vittorio's speech, which was motivated by entrenched fear and a desire to establish control over the natural environment, began to gather momentum among some of the more traditionally oriented locals. This was especially true for those villagers who lived on the fringes of the valley and were concerned about their animals. The placid temperament that Angelo had displayed up to this point was not a guarantee of his future behavior, according to Vittorio and his group, who started exerting pressure on the local authorities. They insisted that the wolf be taken captive and moved to a more isolated location, one that was quite removed from any human settlements. On the surface, their arguments were couched in terms of public safety and appropriate wildlife management, but behind the surface, there was a deep-seated mistrust of wild animals and a desire to regain what they regarded to be their land. As the pressure increased, a tension that was not overt but could be felt throughout the town emerged. Despite the fact that many people were moved by Angelo's commitment and the mystery surrounding his contact with Isabella, the deeply established dread of wolves, which had been carefully cultivated over the course of generations of mythology and occasional real-life instances, began to reappear in certain neighborhoods. A more fundamental and pragmatic concern for safety was now posing a threat to the relative tranquility and comprehension that had recently been established in relation to Angelo. A set of tracks, which were larger and more numerous than Angelo's, were found in the woods that surrounded the farms that were located nearby, which added to the anxiety that was already present. The fact that these traces indicated the presence of a small pack of wolves in the vicinity was something that had been overlooked in the past because of the attention that had been placed on Angelo. The discovery provided Vittorio with additional ammunition for his arguments, as he asserted that Angelo's presence could encourage other wolves to approach the hamlet, hence increasing the likelihood of a battle occurring. The authorities found themselves in a precarious situation since they were stuck between the emotive pleadings of the majority of the villagers who wanted to protect Angelo and the mounting pressure from the hunting club and the farmers who were concerned about Angelo's safety. In spite of the fact that they were hesitant to disturb Angelo, particularly in light of the odd circumstances surrounding his arrival, they were unable to dismiss the possibility that there was a pack of wolves in the area. Understanding that the tension was rising, Dr. Finch and his colleagues made the decision to offer their assistance. They proposed the use of tracking devices that did not need any invasive procedures in order to keep track of Angelo's travels and to determine whether or not he was actually a member of a larger pack. Their objective was to collect factual information that would supply the authorities with the information they needed to make an educated choice that would strike a balance between the interests of the community and the welfare of the wolf. It had gotten more difficult to handle the issue. The narrative of Angelo was no longer merely a heartfelt account of loss and devotion. Rather, it had become entangled with more general concerns regarding the conflict between humans and wild animals, the impact of deeply entrenched fear, and the delicate balance that must be maintained between compassion and practicality. The unprecedented tranquility that had settled over the valley was threatened by forces from the outside, and the question of what Angelo would do next was now exacerbated by the question of what the villagers and the government would do in response to the situation. At this moment, the fragile harmony that had been constructed on the basis of shared sorrow and a common secret language was confronted with a tremendous obstacle. The weight of the hunting association's continuous demands and the disconcerting discovery of the larger wolf footprints began to cause the careful equilibrium that had been maintained in the community to begin to unravel. The local authorities, who were commanded by Sheriff Rossi, who was not related to Isabella and was pragmatic but troubled, found themselves having an increasing amount of internal strife. Their hearts were moved by the incredible narrative of Angelo and his seemingly peaceful vigil, which had attracted international attention and painted the hamlet in an unexpectedly favorable light. On the other hand, the village had been painted in a negative way. On the other hand, it was impossible to disregard the possibility of a wolf pack being in the area, taking into account the long-standing fear of wolves that is deeply embedded in the culture of the area. Sheriff Rossi was aware of the emotional commitment that the villagers had to Angelo, but he was also responsible for ensuring the residents' safety and the health of their cattle. As the interactions between the various factions became more complicated and emotionally heated, the situation became more complicated. He pleaded with the authorities to protect Angelo with a voice that was filled with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. He argued that the wolf's gentle behavior was proof of his character, and that judging him based on the actions of other wolves would be a grave injustice to Isabella's memory. Old Man Tiberia's voice was filled with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. Marta, reflecting the sentiments expressed by Tiberio, formed a small but vociferous group of people who stood vigil beside the grave as a quiet monument to their support for Angelo. On the other hand, Vittorio and his hunting association organized town meetings, during which their rhetoric became increasingly adamant. In addition to providing anecdotal evidence of previous wolf attacks, they provided a bleak picture of the potential danger that could arise if Angelo and any other wolves were permitted to roam freely in the vicinity of the community. They found themselves convinced by Vittorio's fear-mongering, particularly those with young children or cattle, and their initial sympathy for Angelo waned under the weight of these fears. Some of the more susceptible villagers, particularly those with small children or livestock, found themselves swayed. It was a surprise when Dr. Alistair Finch and his research team ended up being mediators in this disagreement that was getting worse. Initially, they had the sole aim of conducting scientific research. However, they found that they were becoming increasingly invested in Angelo's healthy state. Their data, which was methodically collected through remote observation, constantly demonstrated that Angelo maintained a calm mood, with his activities primarily confined to the cemetery and the forests that were immediately surrounding it. During their conversation with Sheriff Rossi, they discussed their results and emphasized that there was no evidence to imply that Angelo constituted a threat to either humans or animals. Additionally, they brought attention to the fact that Angelo's paw prints were far larger than those of the wolves whose footprints had been discovered in the vicinity of the farms. A nuanced viewpoint was presented by Dr. Volkov, who drew on his extensive knowledge with the behavior of wolves. Considering that Angelo had been brought up in close contact to humans and that he would have a distinctive mode of communicating with Isabella, he proposed that Angelo might be a very unusual individual. When asked about extending Angelo's behavior to other wild wolves, he warned against doing so and emphasized the significance of understanding the dynamics of the potential pack that could be found in the area. Due to the fact that she was stuck in the between of these competing points of view, Sheriff Rossi was presented with a challenging dilemma. Despite the fact that he appreciated the emotional bond that the villagers had to Angelo and the scientific insights that the researchers had, he was still required to address the valid safety concerns that a major percentage of the population contained. He suggested a compromise, which consisted of continuing to keep an eye on Angelo and the possible wolf pack, in addition to increasing the number of patrols in the regions where the larger tracks had been discovered. The people were exhorted to maintain their vigilance, but they were also cautioned against taking any hasty moves against Angelo. The mental and emotional predicaments were quite real. Residents of the hamlet who were sympathetic to Angelo struggled with the worry that their sympathy would unwittingly put the lives of others in jeopardy. The evidence of his anguish and loyalty was indisputable, and those who feared him struggled to come to terms with it. The researchers struggled with the ethical implications of their presence, as well as their desire to safeguard a remarkable species while simultaneously making a contribution to the advancement of scientific understanding. It was dependent on a delicate mix of empathy, caution, and the unpredictable behavior of the wild creatures that roamed the margins of the valley that the fragile tranquility of the valley hung precariously. The village's uneasy ceasefire was maintained, but the tension that had been building up for some time continued to simmer. Deputies under the command of Sheriff Rossi boosted their patrols and concentrated their attention on the farms located on the fringes of the valley, which were the locations where the largest wolf footprints were found. Dr. Finch's team closely followed Angelo, and their recordings revealed the continuous pattern of his musical cries, which were frequently punctuated with times of calm vigil at Isabella's grave. Their steadfast faith that Angelo would be left undisturbed was reflected in the fact that the locals who backed him continued to maintain their vigilant presence close to the grave. Nevertheless, a fresh development destroyed the fragile calm that had been established. Old man Giorgio, a rural farmer who lived the farthest away from the village, said that several sheep from his flock had vanished without a trace. In contrast to the previous assaults, there were no remains discovered. Rather, just traces leading into the thick forest were discovered. Giorgio was sure that the tracks were too large to be Angelo's, which added gasoline to the fire of the suspicions that a larger wolf pack was operating in the region. As a result of this latest event, Vittorio and his hunting group were more adamant in their requests for action to be taken against all of the wolves in the area, including Angelo. They contended that Angelo's persistent presence was luring additional wolves to the region, which was causing a precarious circumstance for the town. The distress that Giorgio was experiencing intensified their discourse, which eventually began to persuade some of the locals who had previously shown sympathy. An additional intriguing discovery was uncovered by Dr. Finch's team in their audio recordings of Angelo, which added to the mounting anxiety that was surrounding the situation. They were able to record a different kind of vocalization on multiple times, which was a sequence of deeper, guttural calls that sounded like conversation with other wolves. These calls were interspersed with his typical melodic howl on multiple instances. These noises were unique from his howls that he made on his own, and appeared to be answers to weak howls that originated from the deeper portions of the forest that surrounded him. It was clear from this that Angelo was not completely cut off from the rest of the pack, and in fact had some interaction with other wolves. The next question that arose was whether or not Angelo was a member of the pack whose footprints had been discovered close to Giorgio's farm. If this is the case, his calm demeanor in the cemetery may be a deceiving front, concealing a more predatory nature when he is in the company of his pack. Even among Angelo's most steadfast supporters, this possibility planted the seeds of some degree of uncertainty. Dr. Volkov, while conducting an analysis of the newly discovered vocalizations, cautioned against making hasty judgments. It was brought to his attention that wolves have a complicated social structure and a wide range of sounds that are used for a number of functions. It is not always the case that Angelo was involved in the disappearance of animals because he communicated with other wolves over the matter. Simply put, it could be an indication that he is aware of their presence or that he is making an effort to maintain his distance. The circumstantial evidence, on the other hand, was intensifying, and the pressure that was being put on Sheriff Rossi was increasing. Although he was aware that he needed to take decisive action in order to guarantee the safety of the community, he was also hesitant to cause harm to Angelo. This was especially true when considering the unique circumstances surrounding his vigil and the absence of direct evidence that linked him to the sheep that had gone missing. When Dr. Finch's team used thermal imaging cameras at night, they saw Angelo departing the cemetery on multiple occasions. This added a new layer of mystery to the situations that they were investigating. He would not go very far, and he would typically remain inside the perimeter of the woods that bordered the cemetery. However, before he would return to his vigil, he would let out a certain sequence of his musical screams. The manner in which Isabella behaved hinted that she might have a connection to something or someone that existed beyond her death. A gathering of other wolves was he attending? Was he looking for something in particular? Alternatively, was this an additional layer of his one-of-a-kind communication? A nightly farewell that went beyond the bounds of the cemetery? There was a distinct sense of doom in the valley as a result of the growing tension, which was combined with these new questions that there were no answers to. There was a rising sense of concern among the villagers as a result of the mystery that surrounded the sheep that went missing and Angelo's behavior of leaving the graveyard at night. In order to boost their demands for Angelo's expulsion and a broad culling of wolves in the area, Vittorio and his hunting group presented Giorgio's death as conclusive evidence that wolves represented a clear and present danger. They used the tragedy to support their demands. Instead of portraying Angelo as a sorrowful buddy, they began to portray him as a possible threat that was hiding in plain sight. Their language got more harsh. Sheriff Rossi, who was feeling the mounting pressure from both sides of the community, made the decision to increase the patrols and allowed the use of motion-activated cameras in the woods that surrounded Giorgio's farm and in the area close to the cemetery. The objective of his investigation was to collect tangible evidence that would either link Angelo or the possible wolf pack in the disappearance of the sheep and shed light on Angelo's activities during the midnight hours. Additionally, while Dr. Finch's team continued their research of Angelo's voice, they also installed more advanced tracking devices on him in the hopes of gaining insight into the reason for his nocturnal travels and the location of his final destination. It was the unique sequence of melodious screams that he released before leaving the graveyard that really piqued their interest. They wondered if it was a sort of communication directed at someone or something in the woods that were located in the surrounding area. In their defense of Angelo, Old Man Tiberio and Marta, along with a small group of followers, continued to be unwavering in their commitment. In their argument, they stated that the wolf's habit of returning to Isabella's grave every morning was evidence of his faithfulness and the gentle temperament he possessed. They argued that the missing sheep were probably the work of the other wolves whose footprints had been uncovered, and that Angelo was being unfairly targeted due to the fact that there is a long-standing prejudice against his type. On the other hand, even some of Angelo's most steadfast supporters started to have reservations, particularly once they learned about his nightly departures and the resultant loss of animals. One of the things that caused concern was the notion that Angelo was living a double life, one in which he was a quiet mourner during the day and a predator during the night. After doing an analysis of the tracking data provided by Dr. Finch's team, Dr. Volkov observed that Angelo's movements during the night were very confined, and he never went more than a few miles away from the cemetery. Additionally, he made the observation that the precise times of his departures and returns did not have a direct correlation with the period of time during which Giorgio's sheep vanished or disappeared. The fact that Angelo might not have been directly involved in that particular occurrence as a result of this brought some reassurance. When Dr. Finch's team was looking through historical documents of Isabella's life, they came across a new connection. They found out that Isabella's late husband, the shepherd, had owned a special breed of sheepdog. This breed is well known for its peculiar vocalizations, which can include high-pitched, almost melodious barks. In addition, they discovered historical images that depicted the dog engaging in playful interactions with juvenile wolves in the region where Isabella and her husband had resided many years before. A fresh hypothesis was conceived as a result of this discovery. Could Angelo have been one of those juvenile wolves? Would it have been possible for him to build an early bond not only with Isabella's husband, but also with his one-of-a-kind sheepdog, possibly learning to associate particular melodic sounds with feelings of security and compassion while doing so? One possible explanation for his receptivity to the whistles and his generally friendly approach toward human beings is that this is the case. The enigma that surrounded Angelo became even tighter. It was not possible to provide an explanation for his nightly departures and precise howls, and the fact that he was connected to Isabella's history and the sheepdog that her husband had gave an additional degree of intricacy to his behavior. They all watched and waited, their understanding of Angelo developing as new signs appeared, pointing at a story that was significantly more complex and emotionally powerful than they had previously imagined. The villagers, the authorities, and the researchers all watched and waited. The fragile peace that had been established in the valley continued to exist, but the underlying questions regarding Angelo's true nature and his eventual objectives continued to feed a sense of expectation and dread. By this point, the tension in the valley had reached its breaking point. And another farmer reported the disappearance of livestock, this time closer to the hamlet, and the terror among the residents who were already experiencing a higher level of anxiety increased. Having been encouraged by these additional losses, Vittorio and his hunting organization presented an ultimatum to Sheriff Rossi. They demanded that Angelo be captured and removed from the area, or else they would take matters into their own hands personally. In spite of the fact that they were veiled, their warnings held a deadly undertone, which suggested that they might take some kind of direct action against the wolf. As Sheriff Rossi felt the weight of his responsibility and the developing anger in the community, he was aware that he needed to take immediate action. In the vicinity of Giorgio's farm, motion-activated cameras had acquired fleeting photos of a small pack of wolves, so proving their presence. However, none of the photographs clearly showed Angelo among the pack of wolves. Angelo's nightly excursions remained limited and brief, according to the tracking data provided by Dr. Finch's team. This suggested that Angelo's activities were primarily contained to the neighborhood of the cemetery, with his nightly excursions continuing so. However, the absence of conclusive evidence of his innocence was not sufficient to soothe the growing dread and wrath that was being expressed. In an effort to gain a better understanding of Angelo's behavior during the night, the team led by Dr. Finch made the decision to follow him while maintaining a safe distance and employing night vision equipment. During that night, they witnessed something that was not only shocking, but also profoundly moving. There was no indication that Angelo went in the direction of the farms or any livestock. Rather than that, he made his way to a little area in the trees that was abutting the graveyard. The clearing was overgrown. In the middle of the clearing was a stone that had been worn and covered in moss. It was a straightforward marker that was not marked. As soon as Angelo arrived at the stone, he let out the particular series of musical howls that they had recorded. Before going back to his vigil at Isabella's grave, he eventually laid down next to the marker and rested his head on it. He remained there for a little period of time before returning to his position. A profound connection to this unidentified location and marking was implied by the ritualistic conduct that was seen. On the next morning, Dr. Finch's team conducted an investigation into the clearing. They removed the moss and detritus from the stone with great care, which revealed a faint inscription that read, "Luca, my heart's song." Old man Tiberiu, upon being shown a photograph of the inscription, confirmed that Luca was the name of Isabella's late husband, who was a shepherd and singer. In the woods, he added, this had been one of their most cherished places to go to have some peace and quiet. The information was simply mind-boggling. Angelo was not only grieving the loss of Isabella, he was also paying tribute to the memory of the man who had most likely been the first person to offer him kindness. This man was the origin of the musical whistles that Angelo was now echoing. His nightly excursions were not motivated by sexual desire. Rather, they were a silent pilgrimage to respect a link that had been severed. This revelation offered a compelling alternative narrative to the one that Vittorio had been spreading about dread. Angelo was portrayed not as a scary predator, but rather as a creature who was profoundly connected to the human world via relationships of love and shared melodies. Despite this, the ultimatum that had been issued by the hunting group continued to loom large, and Sheriff Rossi was under a great deal of pressure to take action before they followed through. At this crucial juncture, the battle reached its tipping point. The decision had to be made by Sheriff Rossi, who was equipped with the fresh facts about Angelo's persistent, peaceful behavior and the memorial that was designed for Luca. Would he give in to the fear and prejudice that Vittorio instilled in him, or would he put his faith in the astounding evidence of Angelo's loyalty and the fundamental relationships that transcended species? A climactic confrontation between fear and understanding was about to take place, and the fate of the wolf and the spirit of the valley hung perilously in the balance. This staged the scene for the showdown. The situation that Sheriff Rossi found himself in was one that was impossible to escape. In contrast to the dread and hatred that Vittorio had fanned, the evidence that was gathered by Dr. Finch's team, which revealed that Angelo made nightly pilgrimages to Luca's memorial, provided a compelling alternative story. On the other hand, The disappearances of animals continued, and the pressure from the hunting group, which threatened to take vigilante action, was increasing with each passing hour. He was well aware that delay could result in the death of innocent animals or, more likely, a possibly lethal conflict between armed residents and the wild. He convened a meeting of the town, and the atmosphere in the village hall was dense with mixed feelings of anxiety and conflicting emotions. The first person to speak was Vittorio, who was surrounded by many members of the hunting group. His voice resounded with the justified wrath and dread that he believed in. He detailed the losses that the farmers had suffered and emphasized the possible threat that Angelo and any other wolves posed to the population of the community. His demand was that Sheriff Rossi immediately provide permission for a hunt to be conducted, not only for Angelo, but also for any wolves that were discovered within a 5-mile radius of the village. His statements caused several of the locals to become terrified, and their expressions were filled with concern for their families and their means of subsistence. In response to Vittorio's allegations, Old Man Tiberiu spoke with a voice that was shaking but commanding. During his speech, he discussed the generosity of Isabella, Angelo's unflinching vigilance, and the recently discovered connection to Luca's memories. He maintained that Angelo's actions were not predatory, but rather an unusual demonstration of loyalty and mourning on Angelo's part. Marta mirrored his views, her youthful passion appealing to the peasants' sense of compassion and understanding. Marta's words were profound. The data that she presented demonstrated that Angelo had a calm temperament and that there was no clear connection between him and the livestock that had gone missing. Dr. Volkov, who was asked by Sheriff Rossi to provide an expert assessment, took the time to meticulously explain the intricate social dynamics of wolves and the improbability of a wolf that had been kept in semi-captivity, as Angelo most likely was, suddenly becoming a predator of sheep. He placed particular emphasis on the distinct paw prints that were discovered at the kill sites, as well as the tracking data that differentiated Angelo's movements from the dates and places of the sheep that went missing. Dr. Finch, whose initial scientific disinterest had been replaced by a real concern for Angelo's well-being, spoke about the one-of-a-kind conversation that he had witnessed and recorded. By playing the improved audio, he made it possible for the villagers to hear the eerie whistles that were mixed with Angelo's musical cries. This allowed them to understand the likely relationship between the whistles and Isabella and Luca. The tape had a profound effect on the atmosphere of the room, serving as a stark reminder of the incredible connection that was at the core of the situation. With his face carved with the weight of his choice, Sheriff Rossi listened attentively to what was being said. However, he was also aware of the remarkable nature of Angelo's claim and the absence of any actual evidence against him. He understood the terror that people were experiencing. He was aware that if he gave in to Vittorio's demands, it may result in the wrongful killing of an innocent creature and destroy the fragile sense of wonder that had briefly brought the town together. After a long time, he finally stood up, his voice firm and determined. In response to the concerns expressed by the locals and the losses sustained by the farmers, he pledged to increase the number of patrols and to give permission for targeted trapping attempts in the regions where the larger wolf pack had been seen. However, he stated that he would not provide permission for a search for Angelo to be conducted. The absence of concrete evidence against him, the strong evidence of his sadness and loyalty, and the remarkable connection he shared with Isabella and Luca were all reasons that he relied on to support his position. In addition to stressing that he would not accept any criminal attempts to harm Angelo, he cautioned Vittorio and his association from initiating any kind of vigilante action. The reaction of Vittorio and his supporters was one of fury, and their anger was evident. It was at this point that the confrontation reached its zenith. Vittorio attacked the authority of Sheriff Rossi, threatening to disregard his decision and take matters into their own hands. The bold decision made by the sheriff set the stage for a potentially hazardous finale, which meant that the delicate tranquility of the valley was hanging by a thread when it was broken. Are the villagers going to show respect for his authority, or are they going to be so afraid and prejudiced that they end up having a tragic exchange with Angelo? Vittorio and his hunting association reacted angrily to Sheriff Rossi's resolute decision not to authorize a hunt for Angelo. This decision was met with significant opposition from both parties. Despite the fact that his face was distorted with fury, Vittorio accused the sheriff of being stupid and placing sentimentality ahead of the safety of the community. He made a solemn commitment that they would not be passive observers while a possible danger walked free. And he dropped a dark suggestion about their own strategies for dealing with the wolf. His statement stoked the rage and fear of those who followed him, thereby causing a discernible schism to emerge within the community. Rumors began to circulate that Vittorio and his men were gathering their firearms and planning a private hunt for Angelo. Despite the fact that the sheriff had issued a clear warning against taking any kind of vigilante course of action, those villagers who had been supporting the wolf, led by old man Tiberio and Marta, became increasingly concerned. They were concerned about Angelo's safety, as well as the possibility of violence occurring within their community, which had previously been peaceful. With the intention of safeguarding Angelo in the event that Vittorio and his group attempted to cause him harm, they kept a vigilant watch over the cemetery. As Dr. Finch and his team became increasingly aware of the mounting tension, they worked tirelessly to collect additional evidence that would clear Angelo of any wrongdoing. In the hopes of obtaining conclusive evidence of his peaceful behavior and his regular visits to Luca's memorial, they increased the amount of surveillance they conducted during the night. Additionally, they utilized microphones with a higher level of sensitivity in an effort to comprehend the complete context and significance of his melodic howls, as well as the faint whistles that they had recorded. As the sun began to set over the valley on a tense evening, the team led by Dr. Finch witnessed something that prompted them to take their efforts to a whole new level of responsibility. Using their thermal imaging cameras, they were able to capture Angelo leaving the cemetery and heading in the direction of Luca's memorial stone. On the other hand, this time they also discovered the presence of a number of armed figures moving stealthily through the woods in the same direction, clearly following Angelo. The numbers were consistent with the descriptions of Vittorio and the hunting association he was a part of. The researchers did not waste any time in getting in touch with Sheriff Rossi and informing him of their concerning discovery. As soon as the sheriff realized that his worst fears had come true, he immediately gathered his deputies and hurried towards the woods in an effort to stop Vittorio and avoid a confrontation that could have resulted in tragic consequences. In the meantime, Angelo was lying quietly next to the stone that was covered in moss, emitting his soft, melodic howls into the twilight. He was close to the memorial that was dedicated to Luca. He seemed oblivious to the danger that was rapidly approaching. Old man Tiberio and Marta, having heard the rumors of Vittorio's intentions, had also made their way towards the woods, their hearts filled with dread. They arrived at the edge of the clearing, just as Vittorio and his men emerged from the trees, their rifles raised. The peak tension had arrived. Angelo, the innocent creature bound by loyalty and grief, was directly in the path of armed men driven by fear and prejudice. Sheriff Rossi and his deputies were racing against time to intervene. The fragile peace of the valley was about to shatter, and the next few moments would determine whether compassion and understanding would prevail or if a tragic act of violence would silence the haunting melodies of the wolf who attended his rescuer's funeral. The stage was set for a climactic showdown, the outcome of which would forever define the legacy of Isabella's kindness and Angelo's unbelievable loyalty. The clearing around Luca's memorial became a scene of tense confrontation under the fading light. Vittorio and his men, their faces grim and determined, had Angelo in their sights, their rifles raised and ready. The melodic howls that had filled the twilight moments before were abruptly silenced as the wolf sensed the sudden shift in the atmosphere, his peaceful demeanor replaced by a wary alertness. Just as Vittorio was about to give the order to fire, old man Tiberio and Marta stepped into the clearing, their frail figures a desperate barrier between the armed hunters and the wolf. "Stop!" Tiberio's voice, though trembling, echoed with a fierce protectiveness. "Leave him be, he has done nothing wrong." Marta stood beside him, her eyes blazing with courage. "He is mourning. Do you not see any? He is more loyal than any of you." Vittorio scoffed, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Sentimentality will get you hurt, old man. This animal is out in the wild. He needs to be put down before he harms someone." Angelo, sensing the danger directed at the humans who had shown him kindness, rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His amber eyes, usually filled with a gentle sorrow, now held a flicker of protective aggression. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the quiet evening. Sheriff Rossi and his deputies burst into the clearing, their weapons drawn, their voices commanding, "Drop your rifles, right now!" The unexpected arrival of the authorities created a chaotic standoff. Vittorio and his men hesitated, their intent momentarily thwarted by the presence of law enforcement. Sheriff Rossi, his face stern, ordered them to stand down, emphasizing the illegality of their vigilante actions. As the human drama unfolded, Angelo did something unexpected. Instead of fleeing into the woods, he moved towards Tiberiu and Marta, nudging them gently with his large head, as if reassuring them. Then he turned his gaze towards Luca's memorial and let out a series of loud, clear howls. But these were different from his usual mournful cries or the melodic responses to the recorded whistles. These howls were strong, resonant, and carried a note of both sorrow and defiance. Then, in the stunned silence that followed his powerful vocalization, Angelo did something that no one could have predicted. He walked to the base of Luca's memorial, nudged the moss-covered stone with his snout one last time, and then, with a final, lingering look at Tiberiu and Marta, he turned and disappeared silently into the dense woods. The villagers, the authorities, and even the frustrated hunters watched in stunned silence as the wolf vanished into the twilight. It was as if, having paid his respects to both Isabella and Luca, and having been defended by those who understood his loyalty, he had finally found a measure of peace and was ready to return fully to the wild. The immediate threat of violence was averted. Sheriff Rossi, after a tense confrontation, managed to disarm Vittorio and his men, promising to investigate the livestock losses thoroughly, but reiterating his protection of Angelo as long as he posed no direct threat. The climax arrived not in bloodshed, but in Angelo's powerful final farewell, a poignant resolution to his extraordinary vigil. He had attended his rescuer's funeral in his own way, had honored the memory of her beloved, and had ultimately chosen to return to the wild, leaving behind a stunned village and a lasting legend of unbelievable loyalty. The departure of Angelo into the twilight woods left a profound silence in the clearing around Luca's memorial, a silence that gradually spread throughout the valley. The immediate threat of violence had passed, but the echoes of the extraordinary events lingered in the hearts and minds of the villagers. Vittorio and his hunting association, though frustrated, were eventually persuaded by Sheriff Rossi's firm stance and the lack of any concrete evidence linking Angelo to the livestock losses. The investigation into the disappearances continued, focusing on the confirmed presence of the other wolf pack in the area. The legend of the wolf who attended his rescuer's funeral spread far beyond the small Italian village, captivating the world with its poignant tale of interspecies loyalty and grief. News outlets and wildlife experts flocked to the valley, eager to understand the remarkable bond between Isabella and Angelo. Dr. Alistair Finch and his team continued their research, now focusing on the unique communication they had documented, their scientific curiosity tempered by a deep respect for the extraordinary creature they had observed. Their findings, published in prestigious journals, revolutionized the understanding of wolf cognition and emotional capacity, highlighting the potential for deep and meaningful connections between humans and the wild. Old Man Tiberiu and Marta became local heroes, their unwavering defense of Angelo serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of compassion and understanding. The small wildflowers that Sophia had left at Isabella's grave each day became a symbol of the village's evolving relationship with the wild, a testament to the kindness that had bridged the gap between species. Angelo was occasionally sighted in the distant hills surrounding the valley, a solitary grey figure moving with a newfound peace. He never returned to the cemetery, but the villagers often spoke of hearing his melodic howls carried on the wind, a hauntingly beautiful reminder of his loyalty and the silent conversations he had shared with Isabella and Luca. His final appearance at Luca's memorial, a deliberate act of homage before his departure, solidified his place in local folklore, a wild angel who had come to say goodbye in his own unique way. The story of Angelo served as a powerful catalyst, prompting a shift in the villagers' perception of wolves and the natural world. The ingrained fear began to give way to a greater appreciation for the complex emotional lives of wild creatures and the potential for unexpected bonds of loyalty and affection. Isabella's quiet kindness had not only saved a wolf's life, but had also touched the hearts of an entire community, leaving a lasting legacy of compassion and understanding. The unforgettable story of Angelo, the wolf who attended his rescuer's funeral, reminds us that loyalty and love can transcend the boundaries of species. His unbelievable actions offer a profound glimpse into the emotional depths of the animal world and the powerful impact of human kindness. What aspect of Angelo's story resonated with you the most? Did you believe a wild animal could exhibit such profound loyalty and understanding? In the comments section below, please share your ideas. If you were deeply moved by this extraordinary tale of connection and farewell, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that explore the remarkable bonds between humans and animals. And don't miss our next video, where we delve into other astonishing instances of animal loyalty and grief, showcasing the incredible capacity for love and remembrance in the creatures we share our planet with. Click here to watch now and continue your journey into the heart of the animal kingdom. We are grateful that you have chosen to accompany us on this emotional journey. We hope it has left you with a renewed sense of wonder and a deeper appreciation for the extraordinary connections that bind all living things.